What kind of man tells Bruce Lee to his face, in a crowded room thick with anticipation, "Stand 30 seconds against me, and I'll call you master"? It was late evening in Los Angeles, 1972, inside a modest training space that smelled faintly of liniment oil and worn canvas, the air heavy with heat and quiet expectation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across the scuffed wooden floor where dozens had gathered, students, skeptics, and a few men who had built reputations on being untouchable. Nobody there could have predicted that what would unfold next, what would happen in just 7 seconds, would echo through martial arts circles for decades, retold in whispers and half-believed recollections. The room itself was unremarkable at first glance, but to those who trained there it carried weight. The walls were lined with mirrors slightly fogged from humidity, reflecting rows of students seated cross-legged, their eyes fixed on the center of the floor. A faint scent of sweat clung to the air, mixed with the sharp tang of disinfectant and the earthy smell of canvas mats that had absorbed years of impact. Near the far wall, a heavy bag swayed gently, as if remembering the last strike that had set it in motion. Conversations had faded into murmurs, then into silence as attention shifted toward the man standing near the center. Steven Seagal, broad-shouldered, imposing, his presence filling the space with a kind of deliberate gravity, stood with his arms relaxed but his posture unmistakably confident. He had built his reputation on control, on leverage, on the quiet certainty that no matter the size of his opponent, he could dictate the outcome. His hands were thick, his wrists solid, his stance grounded like a rooted tree. There was nothing theatrical about him. His confidence came from repetition, from years of drilling movements until they became instinct. To many in the room, he represented a different philosophy, one rooted in structure, tradition, and the belief that discipline alone could overcome anything. Across from him, Bruce Lee appeared almost understated by comparison. He wore simple training clothes, nothing that called attention to itself, and his frame, lean, compact, seemed almost too light for the kind of confrontation that was about to unfold. He had been speaking moments earlier, explaining something to a small group of students, his voice calm, measured, almost conversational. Now he stood quietly, his hands at his sides, his expression neutral, as if he were observing rather than participating. There was no tension in his shoulders, no sign of preparation that the untrained eye could detect. To some, it made him seem vulnerable. To others, it was something harder to define. The witnesses felt it before anything was said outright. A shift in the air, a tightening of attention. Someone near the back adjusted their position, leaning forward slightly. Another folded their arms, eyes narrowing. There were perhaps 50 people in that room, each carrying their own expectations, their own biases about what would happen if these two men collided. Some believed in size and strength, others believed in speed, but no one yet understood what they were about to see. Seagal's internal calculation was not malicious. It was rooted in certainty. He had seen systems come and go, had heard claims of speed and fluidity before. To him, 30 seconds was more than enough time to prove a point, to demonstrate that structure and control could neutralize unpredictability. His confidence was not loud, but it was firm, anchored in the belief that mastery was measurable. And in that moment, he believed he was about to measure Bruce Lee. Bruce, for his part, showed no sign of resistance or irritation. If anything, there was a quiet curiosity in his gaze, as if he were more interested in the question than the challenge itself. He shifted his weight slightly, barely noticeable, and let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone in the room to feel it settle into their bones. Then came the words, spoken clearly enough that no one could pretend they hadn't heard them. "Stand 30 seconds against me," Seagal said, his voice steady, carrying across the room. "And I'll call you master." A few heads turned. Someone exhaled sharply. The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. It wasn't just a challenge, it was a public test. A line drawn in front of witnesses who would remember the outcome. Bruce didn't respond immediately. He didn't stiffen or square up or offer any verbal pushback. Instead, he simply looked at Seagal for a moment, his expression unchanged, then took a small step forward. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, as if he were approaching a conversation rather than a confrontation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried, "Show me," he said. That was all. No bravado, no rejection, just an invitation. Seagal interpreted the calm as acceptance, and perhaps, at a deeper level, as underestimation. His confidence sharpened, he adjusted his stance, feet grounding into the floor, hands ready but not overtly aggressive. In his mind, this would be controlled, measured, decisive. 30 seconds was generous, more than enough. Around them, the room shifted. People leaned forward. Someone near the edge of the mat placed their coffee cup down carefully, as if sensing that even the smallest distraction might cause them to miss something important. The air felt thicker now, charged with anticipation. Bruce raised his hands, not in a rigid guard, but in a loose, almost relaxed position, elbows close, fingers alive. His eyes remained steady, focused, but not tense. There was no visible buildup, no dramatic signal that something was about to begin. And then it did. In the first second, Seagal moved. It was decisive, direct, a forward step combined with an attempt to establish control, his hand reaching to engage, to encatch, to impose structure onto the exchange. To most watching, it looked fast, impressive even, but before that first motion could fully settle into its intended path, Bruce was already somewhere else. By the second, the line of attack had dissolved. Seagal's hand met nothing but air, his balance subtly disrupted in a way that was difficult to see but impossible to ignore from within. Bruce's movement was minimal, so small that several witnesses later struggled to describe it, but it was precise, cutting through the space between intention and execution. In the third second, confusion entered. Not visible at first, but present. Seagal adjusted, attempting to re-establish contact, to regain the structure he relied on. His second motion came faster, sharper, driven, now by the need to correct what had just happened. It failed again. By the fourth second, Bruce's hand made contact, not with force but with purpose. A light touch at the wrist, a redirection that seemed almost effortless, yet completely altered the trajectory of Seagal's movement. It wasn't a block, it wasn't a strike, it was something in between, something that removed options rather than confronting them. The fifth second changed everything. Seagal felt it then, the realization that he was no longer dictating the exchange. His center shifted, his footing compromised just enough to create instability. Bruce stepped in, not aggressively, but decisively, closing distance with a fluidity that left no room for recovery. In the sixth second, control was absolute. Seagal's structure, the very foundation of his confidence, had been dismantled piece by piece, each adjustment arriving a fraction too late. His body responded, but his intent could no longer catch up. 7 seconds after first contact, it was over. Not with impact. Not with a dramatic throw or a visible strike that would satisfy an audience expecting spectacle. It ended with stillness. Bruce stood in complete control, his position unassailable, his opponent neutralized without harm. The room, which had been filled with anticipation moments earlier, fell into a silence so complete it felt almost unnatural. 7 seconds. That's all it took. No one moved. A man near the back blinked, as if trying to reconcile what he had just seen with what he thought he understood. The coffee cup someone had set down earlier tipped slightly unnoticed. Bruce stepped back first. He released the moment as easily as he had created it, lowering his hands, his posture returning to that same relaxed neutrality. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of victory, only a quiet reset, as if the exchange had simply been part of a larger conversa. Attention. Seagal remained still for a moment longer, the realization settling in, not as humiliation but as clarity. His breathing slowed, his posture softened. The certainty he had carried into the challenge had not been shattered violently. It had been gently, precisely dismantled. Bruce looked at him not with superiority, but with understanding. "You're very skilled," he said calmly, "but you're announcing every movement before it happens." The words were simple, but they landed with weight. He gestured toward the heavy bag nearby, walking over and tapping it lightly. "Power is not the problem," he continued. "Timing and intention." With a small demonstration, he showed how even a slight shift, a fraction of a second, could change everything. His hand moved, barely visible, and the bag reacted with a sharp, controlled snap. Not brute force, efficiency. Seagal watched closely now, his earlier confidence replaced by something more valuable: attention. The room leaned in again, but the energy had changed. This was no longer a contest. It was a lesson. "You can come by," Bruce added after a moment, his tone casual. Tuesday evening. There was no insistence, no pressure, just an open door. In the months that followed, the story began to spread, not as a boast, but as a quiet account shared among those who had been there. Some spoke of the speed, others tried to describe the feeling of watching something they couldn't quite explain, but all agreed on one detail: the time. 7 seconds. Years later, in a reflective interview, Seagal would speak of that moment with a different tone. "It wasn't about losing," he said. "It was about understanding how much I didn't see." His approach to training shifted, his teaching evolving to incorporate the very principles he had once questioned. Bruce Lee would pass away not long after, at the age of 32, leaving behind friend. Fragments of philosophy, demonstrations, and stories like this, one moments that resisted easy explanation but carried undeniable impact. The room where it happened would change, the people would move on, but the memory remained, passed from student to student, instructor to instructor, and always the same detail anchored the story: 7 seconds. The lesson is clear, though it rarely arrives so cleanly in everyday life. Mastery is not about overpowering what stands in front of you. It's about understanding it so completely that conflict dissolves before it fully forms. There are those who seek to prove themselves through dominance, and others who reveal truth through demonstration. One path demands victory, the other creates understanding. Somewhere, perhaps in an old photograph tucked into a forgotten archive, there may be an image of that room. 50 people, a quiet floor, two men at the center of a moment that would outlive them both. And if you listen closely to the stories that still circulate, you'll notice something else. This wasn't the only time someone tried to measure Bruce Lee, and the next encounter would test something far more dangerous than time.